Welcome to lecture number 5 in our course. First thing I want to say is remember the first component of your paper is due this week. It's the writing out what you're going to study and getting your first taste of writing and introduction. So make sure that you've attended to that. We're going to start with Our Lives book. And we're going to talk about Native Americans. And there's some things I want to talk about even before we get into the actual book work. First is, there were cultures here before Europeans. And that seems evident to say, but often the way Native Americans are portrayed is almost like they were someplace else. And then Europeans got here and then there was America. And we have a process calling Native Americans savages or primitive or wild diminishes them in the historical look, anthropological, sociological look of their contributions and their cultures. These were actually, strangely enough, often cultures admired by the Founding Fathers. The Iroquois in particular, that we'll talk about a little bit later in specifics, admired. We took the Confederation of States a lot from their idea of a confederacy, yet at the same time, those same Founding Fathers exclude them actively from the idea of what and who the Constitution would apply to, and then set about exterminating them. We also hear about European technology, and often that's used to diminish Native Americans, and that's sort of survival of the fittest pseudoscience way. Oh, well, we had superior technology, so obviously the Europeans were the right group to take over. But much of what European technology actually came from was used to accumulate and collect wealth for one person at the expense of others in the group. Native Americans didn't need to collect wealth for survival. And they knew how to use nature as their grocery store and factory, plus their concept of status was different. Chiefs often wouldn't eat until all the old or children had eaten, and it was a sign of their status. It was based on how much you gave away to the less fortunate in the group, not what you accumulated. Another thing used to diminish Native Americans is, oh, well, they had intertribal warfare. And often that's used for European reasoning to wage war upon them. Well, they warred against each other, so we could just war on them, and hey, look how good we are at it. Sorry, white people are just better at it. But there's no evidence of tribal genocide where all the members of an opposing group, like women and kids, would be destroyed, or a whole ecosystem would be destroyed to kill off a group like Europeans did. We've been taught that it was okay or natural for the genocide of Native Americans, as if they were just unfit to survive. How was this done? Well, there's little discussion of the 15,000 years of Native American history and culture in our history books. In fact, many history books spend only about 20 pages discussing Native American history, which again encompasses 15,000 years, then 400 pages of the 200 or 300 years of white people taking over. The next strategy is just straight up lies. Columbus didn't discover anything. As we've read from that first part in week 2, he was a monster, killing Native Americans and enslaving them. Ideas that we have like Thanksgiving, where, these two groups, Native Americans and Pilgrims, came together. For the Pequots, that was a massacre. The Thanksgiving was given after a massacre of Pequot Indians. The secret word is Pocahontas for lecture 5A, because this will be in 2 parts. We didn't make treaties that we honored with Native Americans like we honored with Europeans. We used violence to exterminate them, biological warfare, smallpox unintentionally, and then intentionally giving Native Americans cholera blankets on purpose, killing the buffalo on an industrial scale. At any time we thought their land was valuable or useful, we took it by force. Treaties be damned. The Trail of Tears. The land in Oklahoma taken when white people wanted to expand westward. Actually ensconced in a movie called Far and Away, where, oh, the triumph of this Irish guy, and I'm Irish, is they don't mention, oh yeah, by the way, that's the expense of Native Americans whose land you're taking. When gold was found in the Black Hills of the Dakotas, that was covered by treaty, but was taken away anyway. Uranium, this wasn't just back in the olden days. Uranium was found in the 1970s on Indian land. That was taken. Pipelines laid in 2010 were used to take away land from Native Americans. Now, I'm going to hit you with a lot of what we would call sort of outcomes, like things that maybe we should know. And the idea is by not knowing and not being taught these kinds of things, it becomes okay. For instance, first of all, according to the 2020 census, we got 6.79 million Native Americans in a country of roughly 330 million, making about a little over 2%. The Native Americans are the most segregated group across the nation because of the reservation system, and often the second most segregated in urban landscapes. They have the highest poverty rate, 25.4%, the lowest wealth accumulation of any racial group. Any Native American wealth is thought to be $5,000, where white wealth accumulation is $65,000. Life expectancy is only 65 years, while white life expectancy is 76 years. Educational attainment, the lowest educational attainment of any group. Infant mortality, just behind African Americans. Infant mortality for Native Americans is 8.1 per 1,000 lives birth. It's 10.6 for African Americans. To give you an idea, it's 4.4 deaths of infants per 1,000 live births for white folks. Maternal mortality, why do we look at this? Same kind of reason. Infants, so all societies put a lot of effort into keeping infants alive, so if that's not happening, there's something going wrong. And hey, fantastic, the United States leads the developed world in infant and maternal mortality. For Native Americans, that's 40.8 per 1,000 live births, just behind African Americans at 50.1%, or 50.1 per live births. People in prison, again, just behind African Americans, 763 Native Americans in prison per 100,000 people, behind African Americans at 901 per 100,000 people in the population. Alcohol and drug addiction, the highest rate of alcohol or drug addiction, and the highest death rate from opioids. Highest unemployment rate, same as African Americans at over 6.1%. So, what do we get from all of that? Well, I want you to put down and have in your notes key events. I want you to know the 1830 Indian Removal Act and the steps taken by Andrew Jackson. Again, we learn about Andrew Jackson as this wonderful mythical figure. And again, he was terrible and forced Indians because he didn't value or think of them as being fully human beings to be considered. The Sand Creek massacre. So I want you to know about the Sand Creek Massacre. Happened November 29th of 1864. Chief Black Kettle and some others peacefully come to a part of the Sand Creek, the Big Sandy Creek, in Colorado. About 750 Cheyenne and Arapaho. And the governor of the Colorado Territory, John Evans, tells them, come to the fort for supplies and you'll be safe. Meanwhile, the U.S. military has orders that any Native American approaching a fort should be killed on sight. Well, they camp a bit away from a fort, and a guy named Colonel Chivington, with no orders, goes to the camp and opens fire on the peaceful camp, killing 230, mostly women, children, and old people, many of which, and this is from Captain Souls, who was there at the massacre, were on their hands and knees trying to surrender. The bodies were then scalped. I want you to know about what happened at Wounded Knee twice. So look at both occurrences. I want you to know the Dawes Act of 1887. This is where, while appearing to say, oh, we're going to give land to the Native Americans, by chopping it up into pieces, it actually made it easier for white folks to steal more and more of it. I want you to know about the American Indian movement, founded in 1968. A guy named Leonard Peltier. Look that up on your own. Also, what happened at Alcatraz in 1969. So the prison is abandoned in Alcatraz Island, in the middle of San Francisco Bay, in 1863. And using a treaty actually signed by white folks, saying any unused federal land can be reapportioned back to Native Americans. Native Americans occupy Alcatraz. They occupy it for about 19 months when they're violently removed. And one of the questions I remember asking myself was, gee, I wonder, did they have any right to Alcatraz? And I caught myself. Yeah, it was all theirs. All of those islands and territories. So I even had been trained to think in terms of land acquisition as, do they have a right? Giving subconsciously the right to white European people to take it first. I want you to know about Indian schools and how that was used to break Native American culture. I want us to also talk openly about the use of mascots. We just recently had Redskins taken out of Washington, the professional football team, but there are still many, many college and high school mascots that picture Native Americans, and only in one kind of way. They're riding horses, they've got feathers or spears or bows and arrows, and the whole idea there is to, fixate on Native Americans as being these horseback warrior people, and there were certainly elements of that in the Plains cultures, but not all Native Americans did any of those things. But by portraying them constantly as chiefs and braves and those kinds of things, again, we dehumanize them. Another example of dehumanizing. So several years ago, there was a company wanted to start Crazy Horse malt liquor. And I remember reading about the case, and there was people, upset about it, rightfully so. And the way it was actually settled surprised me, and again surprised my own pattern of how I'd been pigeonholed of thinking about Native Americans and who they are. I kind of forgot that Crazy Horse was a person. You can't start Dr. Allen Turley malt liquor without my permission or my family's permission. I'm a person. That's a thing. You can't use my name or likeness. But I didn't even think, hey, wow, yeah, eventually it was stopped because the descendants of Crazy Horse, a real live person who are still around, so you can't use our family's name and our relatives thing, despite them trying to say, oh, well, we're doing it to revere and honor Crazy Horse, because that's what we do with our figures. We honor them through malt liquor. Also, how we picture Native Americans in movies. You have this sort of John Wayne Western thing where the Native Americans are always the bad guys. Or you have the sort of Dances with Wolves thing where Native Americans are represented as universally being better and more noble and in touch with the land. Again, these are all just stereotypes. Native Americans are people. Good, bad, just people. I want you to know the 1862, at the end of the Dakota War, how in November of that year, 303 Sioux Indians were sentenced to die. And in December 26th, the day after day after Christmas, 38 Sioux were hung. And that order was written by Abraham Lincoln. Again, our founding fathers, even our great presidents, they were human beings like the rest of us. And that clearly was a terrible, terrible thing to do, to hang them in a war as whites are taking their land. Side note to history, 2 people that day of the 38 were actually hung by mistake. They weren't supposed to be hung. But of course, since they were considered Indians, nobody cared. I want you to know who the 5 civilized tribes are: the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, and the Creek. Why? Because they actually, during the time of Indian removal, decided to try to work with the U.S. government to try to play ball and be civilized. And for their efforts, the Trail of Tears happened. Here's a good question. When did they become citizens? The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. So women were considered voting citizens before Native Americans were. I also want you to know what blood quantum is. That's in your textbook. And the big thing here in Lecture 5A is, why did all of this happen? What was the genesis of the aggression showed by whites? And it's clearly to get the land that Native Americans were on.